New York City, one of the world's most well-known cities, has a reputation for violence, whether merited or not. The Big Apple has certainly had its fair share of criminals and crime. Here are 10 of the most brutal murders in New York prior to 1905. Straight in at number 10, hacked to death. Picture this. Cries and the sounds of a struggle emanate from a room on the top floor of a Hester Street tenement. A man wearing a soft felt hat is spotted departing in a hurry. Alarmed neighbors enter the room and see Frank Paulson lying on the floor, bleeding. He had been struck with a butcher cleaver or axe, resulting in serious head wounds that exposed bone. Despite the fact that the room was covered in blood, Paulson was alive. By the time police officers summoned an ambulance, he had died from his injuries. Investigators discovered a defensive wound on his right hand, apparently caused by the murder weapon, and he gripped a blood-soaked length of hair. The color could not be confirmed. This lone piece of evidence would be useless. Police apprehended a man in the Bowery who matched the description of the person seen fleeing the crime scene, but he was released since his clothes did not contain a single drop of blood. Further investigation led to Frank Rill, who admitted killing Paulson but claimed the victim attacked him, and he used a hatchet in self-defense. The jury disagreed and convicted him of murder. Number 9. The Nurse Girl Murder. A comfortable middle-class residence on Palmetto Court in Brooklyn. Mr. and Mrs. Jones linger over their lunch, while the hired nurse cares for their 18-month-old infant boy. Later, unfortunate Mrs. Jones enters the kitchen and discovers a horrifying discovery. While the Joneses were enjoying post-dinner piano music in the parlor, Alice O'Donnell, a 28-year-old nurse recently hired to care for their infant son, calmly took a straight razor from the husband's drawer, slit the baby's neck from ear to ear, changed her clothes, and departed. Mrs. Jones had stepped into the kitchen and saw her son's body on the floor, where Alice had left it, pale and stiff in a pool of blood. The cops were promptly called. Alice O'Donnell was detained at her residence on North Portland Avenue. When approached by authorities, she confessed to the crime and showed no remorse. Her motive? Unknown. She claimed she had killed the infant on impulse. While I haven't been able to determine Alice's ultimate destiny, detectives at the time suspected that she was insane. Despite the murdered child's parents' claims that she was in her right mind and lucid at the time of the murder. Number 8. Terror in the Tenderloin. A foul odor emanates from the subcellar of the Hotel Empire in the infamous Tenderloin red light district, alarming the guests. Police find the source of the odor, a human skull smoking in the furnace. A witness told police that he saw ex-convict Thomas Tobin bring an unconscious James Captain Jim Kraft downstairs. The smell of burning flesh emanating from the basement prompted authorities to break down the door. A couple of buckets of water extinguished the flames in the furnace, and a spherical, blackened object resembling a grilled soccer ball was scraped from the embers. It was a human head with the majority of the hair and flesh burnt away. The bloodied murder weapon, a butcher cleaver, lay nearby, as did the rest of the body. The guy was naked and nearly severed in two owing to a big, deep cut across his chest. Tobin was detained instantly, his clothes still stained with blood. He'd killed Kraft to steal $50. Despite his attempts to plead insanity, he had previously been admitted to Matewan Hospital for the criminally insane. He was found to be sane. He was convicted of murder and condemned to death. Number 7. The Silver Lake Horror. 3 boys wander through the woods near the scenic Silver Lake on Staten Island. One falls on a barrel stave projecting from the ground. When they dig out the carpet-wrapped barrel and uncover it, they are horrified to discover the hideous-smelling, decomposing corpse of a young woman instead of treasure. After smashing her skull with a blunt weapon and placing her in the barrel, the killer sprinkled quicklime over her body, leaving her face unrecognizable. The coroner discovered that she was pregnant when she died. After approximately a month of searching for the body, authorities suspected Edward Reinhardt, whose wife, Mary Ann Degnan, had gone missing. The couple had argued, and Reinhardt was known for having a terrible temper. In addition, a few days after Mary Ann vanished, Reinhardt informed neighbors that she had gone to Newark. Soon after, he married another woman. The defense attempted to have the murder case dismissed on the grounds that the body could not be positively identified, but that argument went down like a ham sandwich at a vegan picnic. During the trial, Reinhardt finally admitted to striking Marianne on the head with a hammer during an argument. Later, he recanted, stating she died as a result of dropsy edema medication and that he had just buried the body to escape police attention. The jurors did not buy this story either. He died in the gallows. Number 6. The 8th Ward Mystery. A bartender at a dancing saloon on Thompson Street in the vice-ridden region known as Satan's Circus enters the backyard. Inside the water closet, an outside toilet, he uncovers a shockingly enormous pool of clotted blood and an open straight razor on the floor. He doesn't see the victim's body. Shortly after the frightened bartender phoned the cops, more officers were dispatched to a nearby room on Broome Street, where a woman's body was huddled in blankets on the bed. Mary Jane Sullivan, a prostitute, was beaten to death with a hickory walking cane. The murderer whacked her so violently that the cane shattered, and if you didn't already know, hickory is extremely hard. The only cut on her body was a small slash above her left eye. Police were first unsure whether the murder was linked to the blood found at the dance saloon, but Mary Jane was known to visit the dance saloon. How could she have hemorrhaged from such a tiny wound? It was a question that would not have bothered Jessica Fletcher, but it perplexed New York City cops. Eventually, the picture grew clearer. Mary Jane had resided with 2 other prostitutes under the protection of James Jackson, a Coulsomener, whitewash painter, part-time pimp, and notorious ruffian. Witnesses saw Jackson hitting Mary Jane on a street corner early in the morning, before her body was discovered. Police said an intoxicated Jackson had discovered Mary Jane freelancing in the dance saloon's restroom. He sliced her customer with his razor, resulting in blood, and dragged her home to finish her off. Within a few days of the murder, Jackson grabbed $200 from his bank account and went to Philadelphia. His fate is unknown. Number 5. The Fiend of 2nd Avenue. A Manhattan railway station. A busy porter loads luggage onto a Chicago-bound train. A trunk that smells so strongly of death that the station master wants it opened. The unpleasant stench is created by a young woman's body, which is no longer attractive and blonde. The findings sparked the Great Trunk Mystery. A subsequent police inquiry discovered that the victim died from an infection induced by a botched abortion. Worse still was that it appeared that she had been put into the trunk while alive. When the delivery man who picked up the trunk identified a specific 2nd Avenue address, authorities arrested the resident, Jacob Rosenzweig, an abortionist who obtained his medical degree from a diploma mill. The unnamed body, which was in advanced stages of decomposition, was displayed in public as the world's most stomach-churning performance piece. Hundreds of people flocked to see the filthy remains. Alice Augusta Bowlesby, a New Jersey woman, was eventually recognized by her family's doctor and dentist, and Rosenzweig was tried and found guilty. Number 4. The Witch of Staten Island. Christmas night. A wooden house on Staten Island has caught fire. The fires are extinguished by neighbors and relatives who reside nearby. 2 bodies are discovered in the ashes. A mother and her infant, not burned, but viciously murdered. The stage is set for one of America's most notorious murder cases, which at the time was more exciting than Lizzie Borden's axe-wielding antics. Emmeline Van Pelt Houseman, wife of George Houseman, who was not present that night, and her 20-month-old daughter were both injured, with crushed skulls, fractured bones, and, in the mother's case, a slit throat, before their assailant deliberately set fire to their home. Police suspected Emmeline's sister-in-law, Polly Houseman Bodine. Polly was certainly not an angel. She had left her husband and adolescent children to live in sin with George Waite, an apothecary. She drank. She resided across the street from her brother's home. According to witnesses, she lied not just about Emmeline's departure from town that day, but also about her own location. However, the prosecution was not without flaws. Polly appeared to have no motivation for a bloodbath worthy of Jason Voorhees. Witnesses changed their testimony or were contradicted by the defense. The first trial resulted with a hung jury. The second trial resulted in a conviction, which was later reversed by the state Supreme Court. Polly was finally acquitted in her third trial. The murder of Emmeline Hausman and her infant is still unsolved. Number 3. Jack the Ripper in America. The East River Hotel is located along Manhattan's riverfront. The walls, floor, and furnishings in room 31 are all soaked with blood. The body of Carrie Old Shakespeare Brown, a well-known prostitute, is found strangled, stabbed, and horribly mangled. Police discovered a knife at the site, which the killer had attempted to use to gut her. Brown's murder occurred only a few years after the famed Jack the Ripper killings in London, and the city's sensation-seeking press soon noted the similarities between the two. The headlines read, "Jack the Ripper in America." The cops did not agree. They detained Amir bin Ali, an Algerian who was living in room 33, directly across the hall from the crime scene. Although witnesses were unable to identify him as the man who had been seen with Brown earlier that evening, authorities claimed to have discovered blood on the door and doorknob of his room. Without witnesses to the crime, the prosecution's case was dependent on blood evidence. However, at the time, it was impossible to determine with certainty whether the blood belonged to the victim. It was unclear if the blood belonged to a lady or a man. Nonetheless, the jury convicted Amir of second-degree murder, most likely because he spoke French. After 11 years in Sing Sing, his conviction was overturned due to police tampering with blood evidence. Carrie Brown's murder is unsolved. Number 2. The Bloody Sixth Ward. Oh, and if you're still here, say hi. A tailor's clerk prepares to open the store at 378 Broadway in the early morning. He discovers blood on the door handle. A police officer is dispatched to kick open the door, revealing Bartholomew Burke's naked body and a bloody scene. Burke, an unmarried porter who had worked in the business for several years and slept there in the evenings, was found murdered with such graphic ferocity that Tarantino would take a step back and say, "Whoa." Investigators could see Burke struggled with his killer, as demonstrated by the grisly set of large shears and other bloody things found nearby. In a furious attack, Burke's throat was severely slit and his body mutilated with a strange, blood-stained short sword. A bleeding hammer had made a conspicuous dent in his forehead. Police determined that the perpetrator stabbed Burke to death, washed his hands, not very well, and then left the shop, locking the door and pocketing the key. A blood trail left behind went nowhere. There are no witnesses, no clues. Nothing had been stolen from the tailor's shop or Burke, but his personal belongings had been checked by an unknown person. The police were confused. Attempts to locate the sword failed. The murder of Bartholomew Burke remains unsolved, as there is no suspect or motive. Number 1. The Dutchman Divided. Two boys swimming in the East River discover half of a human torso wrapped in a parcel. A shipment containing 2 adult male legs was discovered floating in the Navy Yard. Residents in Brooklyn, Harlem, and the Bronx report finding dismembered body parts, including a severed thigh wrapped in burlap, a foot and a pelvis in the woods at 176th Street, and more body parts dispersed across the area. The only thing missing was the head. The murder victim was William Golden Suppa, a rubber by trade, it's old-fashioned slang for a massage, who was murdered and dismembered. In an amazing coincidence that would pass muster on a terrible CSI episode, a New York Journal reporter dispatched to inspect the remains for a story identified the victim. He also linked a distinctively patterned oilcloth used to wrap some of the body parts to its purchaser, Augusta Knack, Golden Soup's previous girlfriend. Augusta quickly moved on from her breakup with Golden Suppa and began dating Martin Thorne. The jealous man admitted to a buddy that he murdered Golden Suppa in the Queens home he shared with Augusta because the victim wouldn't stop macking on his honey. The friend notified the police. Thorne was convicted and executed by electric chair in Sing Sing on August 1, 1898. Augusta surrendered state's evidence and served 10 years in jail. If you enjoyed these stories, why not watch the next video here?